Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their weekends at the mall or painting their nails, she could be found at her grandfather's ranch, learning to handle firearms with the precision of a seasoned marksman. Her grandfather, a retired Army veteran, had taught her that respect for weapons came through understanding and skill, not fear. At 22, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. She worked as a mechanic at her uncle's auto shop, her small hands proving surprisingly adept at fixing engines and transmissions. Most people in town knew her as the quiet girl who could fix anything with wheels and had an unusual hobby of competitive shooting. The local shooting range had become Sarah's second home over the years. She practiced 3 times a week, honing her skills with both pistol and rifle. Her collection of trophies from regional competitions filled an entire wall in her bedroom, but Sarah never boasted about her achievements. She preferred to let her actions speak louder than words. When the annual county fair announced that a group of Marines would be setting up a recruitment booth with various demonstration activities, Sarah felt a familiar flutter of excitement. She had always respected the military, influenced by her grandfather's stories and her own deep sense of patriotism. The announcement mentioned that the Marines would be conducting shooting demonstrations and allowing civilians to try their hand at marksmanship challenges. Fair day arrived with typical Texas heat, the sun beating down mercilessly on the dusty fairgrounds. Sarah wore her usual practical attire, jeans, boots, and a simple t-shirt. She wandered through the various booths, enjoying the festive atmosphere but keeping an eye out for the Marine recruitment station. She found it near the center of the fairgrounds, impossible to miss with its bold red, white, and blue banners, and the distinctive Marines emblem displayed prominently. A small crowd had gathered around a shooting range setup, where 3 Marines in their dress blue uniforms were demonstrating precision shooting with standard military sidearms. Staff Sergeant Mike, a decorated Marine with 15 years of service, was leading the demonstration. His 2 companions, Corporals Jake and Danny, were equally impressive specimens of military bearing and confidence. All 3 men carried themselves with the unmistakable swagger that came from years of rigorous training and combat experience. "Ladies and," called out to the growing crowd, "what you're witnessing here is the result of intense military training. The United States Marine Corps produces the finest marksmen in the world. Our standards are higher than any civilian shooting club or hunting organization." The demonstration was undeniably impressive. Each Marine took turns firing at targets placed 50 yards away, consistently hitting the bullseye with mechanical precision. The crowd applauded appreciatively after each perfect shot, clearly awed by the display of skill. "Now," continued, "we're going to open this up for volunteers. Anyone here think they can match what you've just seen? Keep in mind, this isn't your typical hunting rifle or target pistol. This is military-grade equipment requiring military-grade skill." A few men from the crowd stepped forward, eager to try their luck. One by one, they attempted the challenge, but none came close to matching the Marines' accuracy. Some shots went wide, others hit the outer rings of the targets, but none achieved the consistent bullseye performance the Marines had demonstrated. After each civilian attempt, the Marines offered polite but condescending commentary. "Good try, sir, but you can see why it takes months of intensive training to reach our level," would say with a patronizing smile. The crowd seemed to accept this explanation, nodding in agreement that such precision was beyond ordinary people. Sarah watched from the back of the crowd, analyzing each shot and mentally noting the subtle flaws in the civilians' techniques. She could see that most of them were rushing their shots, failing to control their breathing, and not properly adjusting for the slight crosswind that was affecting bullet trajectory. After the 5th civilian failed to come close to the Marine's performance, scanned the crowd again. "Anyone else brave enough to try? Remember, this isn't as easy as it looks in the movies." Sarah felt something stir inside her, a combination of competitive fire and irritation at the Marine's dismissive attitude toward civilian shooters. She raised her hand tentatively. Spotted her immediately, and his expression shifted to one of barely concealed amusement. Well, looks like we have another volunteer. Come on up, miss." As Sarah made her way through the crowd, she could hear whispered comments from the spectators. "That's Sarah Martinez," someone said. "She works at the auto shop." Another voice added, "What's she thinking? She's going to embarrass herself." When Sarah reached the shooting line, looked down at her with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sarah Martinez," she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the dozens of eyes focused on her. "And what shooting experience do you have, Sarah? Ever handled anything more challenging than a .22 caliber rifle?" "Some," Sarah answered simply, not wanting to elaborate on her extensive competition background. Corporal chuckled and nudged. "This should be interesting. Maybe we should start her off with something easier." Shook his head, still grinning. No, she volunteered for the full challenge. "Sarah, you'll be using the same Beretta M9 we've been demonstrating with. Same distance, same targets. Think you can handle it?" Sarah nodded, stepping up to the firing line. She could feel the weight of the crowd's skepticism, the Marines' barely concealed condescension, and the pressure of being the only woman to attempt the challenge. Handed her the Beretta, and Sarah was immediately struck by its familiar weight and balance. She had trained extensively with similar pistols and knew the weapon well, though she gave no indication of her familiarity. "Now, sweetheart," said the endearment dripping with patronizing tone, "take your time. Don't be embarrassed if you miss completely. This is a lot different from whatever you might be used to." Leaned over to and whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear, $20 says she doesn't even hit the target." "You're on," whispered back. "I'll take that bet, but I'm betting she hits it once out of 5 shots just by luck." The third Marine, who had been largely quiet during the demonstration, joined in. "You'll miss, sweetheart," he said with a laugh that was echoed by his companions. "But don't worry about it. Not everyone is cut out for this kind of precision work." Sarah felt her jaw tighten at their dismissive attitude, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had learned long ago that the best response to underestimation was simply to perform. She checked the weapon's safety, examined the sight alignment, and took her position. The crowd had grown larger, word spreading through the fair that a young woman was attempting the Marine shooting challenge. Sarah could feel their expectation of failure pressing down on her, but she blocked out everything except the target 50 yards away and the weapon in her hands. She raised the Beretta, her stance automatically shifting into the modified Weaver position that had served her well in competition. Her breathing slowed and deepened as she settled into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. Continued his commentary for the crowd's benefit. "Notice how she's holding the weapon. Not bad form, actually, but form only gets you so far. This requires real skill and experience that only comes from military training." Sarah tuned out his voice, focusing entirely on her sight picture. She could feel the slight breeze from the left, the same wind that had thrown off the previous shooters. In her mind, she calculated the necessary adjustment, a skill that had become second nature after years of competition shooting. The Marine's laughter had died down as they watched her methodical preparation. Something in her stance and grip suggested more experience than they had initially assumed, but their confidence remained unshaken. After all, they had seen dozens of civilian shooters fail this same challenge. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and she began the slow, steady press that would send the first shot downrange. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting to see if this quiet young woman could do what no other civilian had managed that day. The moment stretched like a taut wire, filled with expectation, skepticism, and the absolute silence that always preceded Sarah's best shots. In competitions, this was the moment she lived for, when everything else faded away except the perfect marriage of skill, concentration, and will. Opened his mouth to offer more patronizing advice, but something in Sarah's absolute stillness made him pause. For the first time since the demonstration began, he found himself genuinely curious about what would happen next. The Beretta remained rock-steady in Sarah's hands, her breathing controlled and even. She had blocked out the Marine's condescending comments, the crowd's expectant murmur, even the heat of the Texas sun beating down on the fairgrounds. In her mind, there was only the target and the shot that would either validate their assumptions about civilian shooters or begin to change them entirely. The first shot cracked through the air with authority, cutting through the ambient noise of the county fair like thunder. Sarah's Beretta had barely recoiled before she was already settling into position for the second shot, her movements fluid and automatic. Staff Sergeant's smug expression began to falter as he squinted downrange through his binoculars. The hole in the target was perfectly centered, dead center bulls. He blinked and looked again, certain his eyes were playing tricks on him. Lucky shot, Corporal muttered, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Sarah's second shot followed 3 seconds later, the report echoing across the fairgrounds. Another perfect bull's, this one so close to the first that the holes nearly overlapped. The crowd, which had been chattering quietly during the build-up, fell into complete silence. Even the carnival music from the nearby rides seemed to fade into the background as everyone focused on the small woman who was systematically destroying their assumptions. Lowered his binoculars, his face showing the first signs of genuine concern. "Two lucky shots," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Sarah's breathing remained controlled and steady. She had entered what competitive shooters called the zone, a state of perfect focus where time seemed to slow and every variable became crystal clear. The wind, the distance, the weapon's characteristics, her own heartbeat, all of it integrated into a seamless calculation that her trained mind performed without conscious thought. The third shot shattered the morning air, and this time didn't bother to check through his binoculars. He could see from 50 yards away that another hole had appeared in the exact center of the target. Corporal stepped closer to his sergeant, his earlier confidence evaporating. He whispered urgently, "Who the hell is this girl?" The crowd was beginning to murmur again, but the tone had completely changed. Where before there had been expectation of failure, now there was growing amazement and respect. Someone in the back called out, "That's 3 perfect shots." Sarah's focus never wavered. She had tuned out everything except the mechanical process of precision shooting that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Shooting is 90% mental, Sarah. Master your mind and the rest follows." The fourth shot came with the same methodical precision as the previous 3. The Beretta spoke once more, and another hole appeared in the target's center, so close to the others that the target was beginning to look like a single, larger hole had been punched through it. His military bearing was beginning to crack. He had spent 15 years in the Marine Corps, had served in combat zones, had trained some of the finest marksmen in the world. He had never seen a civilian, let alone a young woman, demonstrate this level of precision with unfamiliar equipment under pressure. 4, someone in the crowd counted unnecessarily. The word hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Marines had said about civilian shooting capabilities. Sarah chambered her final round, her movements as controlled and deliberate as they had been from the beginning. The Marines watched in stunned silence as she settled into her shooting stance one last time. Their earlier laughter had died completely, replaced by something approaching disbelief. The final shot came with the same crisp authority as the first 4. The Beretta's report seemed to echo longer this time, as if the universe itself was taking note of what had just transpired. Raised his binoculars with trembling hands. Through the lenses, he could see what appeared to be a single, ragged hole in the exact center of the target. 5 shots, fired in rapid succession under pressure, with unfamiliar equipment in front of a hostile crowd, had all found their mark with competition-level precision. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before someone in the crowd began to clap. The applause started slowly but quickly built to a thunderous ovation as the full implications of what they had witnessed sank in. Sarah lowered the Beretta, engaged the safety with practiced ease, and turned to face the Marines. Her expression remained calm and composed, showing no trace of the satisfaction she felt at proving their assumptions wrong. Stood frozen for a moment, the binoculars still pressed to his eyes, staring at a target that had been transformed from a symbol of military superiority into evidence of his own miscalculation. "Sergeant," Sarah said quietly, extending the Beretta grip first toward him, "thank you for letting me try." Slowly lowered the binoculars and looked at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. The young woman standing before him bore no resemblance to the person he had condescendingly called sweetheart just minutes before. Corporal approached the target, his face pale with disbelief. He called out, his voice carrying clearly across the range, "You need to see this." The crowd parted as walked downrange to examine the target personally. What he found confirmed what his binoculars had shown him. 5 shots clustered so tightly in the center of the target that they had essentially created one large hole. It was the kind of grouping that would have been impressive from a trained sniper with perfect conditions and familiar equipment. "How?" asked, his voice barely audible as he turned back towards Sarah. Sarah shrugged slightly, her demeanor remaining modest despite the spectacular nature of her performance. "Practice," she said simply. But the crowd wanted more than that. "What kind of practice?" someone called out. For the first time since stepping up to the firing line, Sarah allowed a small smile to cross her face. "I compete in precision shooting competitions, regional and state level, mostly pistol and rifle events. Started when I was 12. The revelation hit the Marines like a physical blow. Felt his face flush with embarrassment as he realized the depth of his error. He had assumed that because Sarah was young, female, and dressed like a mechanic, she couldn't possibly pose a challenge to trained Marines. Corporal approached Sarah with newfound respect evident in his bearing. "Ma'am," he said, the formal address a stark contrast to the casual dismissiveness of earlier, "what competitions do you shoot in?" "Texas State Precision Pistol Championship 3 years running," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Placed second in the regional USPSA matches last year, working toward nationals." The crowd erupted in fresh applause as Sarah's credentials became clear. She wasn't just a lucky amateur who had gotten a few good shots off. She was a trained, competitive marksman whose skills rivaled or exceeded those of the Marines who had so confidently dismissed her. Found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his unit's competence publicly questioned by someone he had treated with professional condescension. The recruiting mission that had started as a demonstration of Marine superiority had become an embarrassing lesson in the dangers of assumption. "Miss Martinez," said, his voice now carrying the respect that should have been there from the beginning, "I owe you an apology. We clearly underestimated your abilities." Sarah nodded graciously, accepting the apology without gloating. "No harm done, Sergeant. You couldn't have known." But still stinging from the public embarrassment, wasn't ready to let it go so easily. "One good round doesn't prove anything," he said, his voice carrying a hint of his earlier cockiness. "Maybe she just got lucky with the conditions." The crowd's mood shifted again, sensing that the confrontation wasn't over. Sarah looked at for a long moment, her calm demeanor masking the competitive fire that still burned within her. "Would you like me to shoot another round?" Sarah asked quietly. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from the Beretta's barrel. Quickly realized that pride was about to dig them into an even deeper hole, but before he could intervene, nodded. "Different target," he said. "Same distance. Let's see if you can repeat that performance." Sarah looked at the fresh target that had just posted and nodded. "Same weapon?" she asked. "Same weapon," confirmed, handing her the Beretta with a gesture that was more challenge than courtesy. As Sarah took her position for the second round, the crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were about to witness something special. The Marines' demonstration had become something entirely different, a test not just of marksmanship, but of character and composure under pressure. Sarah settled into her stance with the same methodical precision she had shown before, but this time there was something different in her bearing. The respectful young woman who had quietly accepted the Marines' initial condescension had been replaced by a competitor who had been directly challenged. Watched her preparation with growing dread, realizing that wounded pride was about to cost them what remained of their credibility. Sarah Martinez was not going away, and she was not going to miss. The second target stood fresh and unmarked 50 yards downrange, a clean white circle waiting to bear witness to whatever would happen next. Sarah Martinez raised the Beretta with the same steady confidence that had already transformed the Marines' recruitment demonstration into something none of them had anticipated. This time, however, something had changed in the dynamic. The crowd pressed closer, their earlier casual interest replaced by genuine excitement. Word had spread through the fairgrounds that something remarkable was happening at the Marine booth. People abandoned their cotton candy and carnival games to witness what had become an impromptu contest between military training and civilian excellence. Staff Sergeant found himself caught between competing emotions. Part of him hoped Sarah would miss, salvaging some measure of dignity for his unit. But a larger part, the professional warrior who respected skill regardless of its source, found himself rooting for the quiet young woman who had already exceeded every expectation. Sarah's first shot of the second round cracked across the fairgrounds with the same authority as before. Through his binoculars, watched another perfect bullseye appear in the fresh target's center. Corporal's jaw tightened, but he maintained his challenging stance. "One down, 4 to go," he muttered, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. The second shot followed with mechanical precision. Another bullseye, placed so close to the first that the holes nearly touched. Sarah's breathing remained controlled, her stance unwavering, her focus absolute. By the third shot, a hushed reverence had settled over the crowd. They were witnessing something that transcended simple marksmanship. This was artistry, a demonstration of human potential pushed to its limits through dedication and practice. Lowered his binoculars and studied Sarah's profile as she prepared for her fourth shot. Her face showed no trace of stress or uncertainty, only the calm concentration of someone performing a task they had mastered through years of disciplined effort. He began to understand that he wasn't watching luck or even natural talent. He was watching the result of the same kind of dedicated training that created elite Marines, applied with singular focus to the art of precision shooting. The fourth shot punched another hole in the target's center, maintaining the tight group that was becoming Sarah's signature. The crowd's reaction had evolved from surprise to awe to something approaching worship. They sensed they were witnessing something they might never see again. As Sarah settled into position for her final shot of the second round, made a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Instead of hopping for her failure, he found himself silently willing her to succeed. The young woman had earned his respect through demonstration rather than declaration, the way all truly worthy warriors did. The final shot of the second round arrived with the same crisp authority as the previous 9. Sarah lowered the weapon, engaged the safety, and turned to face the Marines with the same calm composure she had shown throughout both rounds. Walked downrange to examine the second target, already knowing what he would find. The 5 shots had created another single, ragged hole in the exact center of the bullseye. 10 shots, 2 separate rounds, identical results. This wasn't luck, accident, or favorable conditions. This was world-class marksmanship delivered under pressure with unfamiliar equipment. When he returned to the firing line, found himself facing not just Sarah, but a crowd that had grown to over 200 people. The Marines' recruitment demonstration had become the main attraction of the county fair, but not in the way they had planned. "Miss Martinez," said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet fairgrounds, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." Sarah nodded, waiting. "Have you ever considered military service?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the Beretta's barrel. Sarah looked at the 3 Marines standing before her, men who had arrived at the fair supremely confident in their superiority, and were now forced to confront the reality that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected places. "I have," Sarah said quietly. "My grandfather served in the army. He always said the military taught men and women to be their best selves." Felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. This wasn't about embarrassing his Marines or proving civilian superiority over military training. This was about recognizing and respecting excellence wherever it appeared. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," said. "What did he teach you about shooting?" For the first time since stepping up to the firing line, Sarah's composed facade showed a crack of emotion. "He taught me that respect for weapons comes through understanding them completely. That precision is the result of patience and practice, not natural talent, and that the person behind the weapon matters more than the weapon itself." The crowd listened in complete silence as Sarah continued. "He also taught me that skill carries responsibility, that if you can do something well, you owe it to yourself and others to do it with honor." Corporal, who had initiated the second challenge, stepped forward. His earlier hostility had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Ma'am," he said, "I owe you an apology. We judged you before we knew you, and that was wrong." Sarah accepted the apology with grace. "You couldn't have known about my background, Corporal. I understand why you made the assumptions you did." But wasn't finished. The professional Marine in him recognized that this situation had become about more than marksmanship or wounded pride. It had become about the values that defined military service: honor, respect, and recognition of merit regardless of its source. "Miss Martinez," he said formally, "would you be interested in learning more about Marine marksmanship training? We have programs that might interest someone with your abilities." The offer surprised everyone, including his own Marines. Corporals and exchanged glances, suddenly understanding that their sergeant was thinking beyond the immediate embarrassment of the demonstration. Sarah considered the question seriously. "What kind of programs?" The Marine Corps has always recruited the best marksmen we can find, explained. Someone with your skills could qualify for specialized training that goes far beyond what most people ever experience. Scout sniper school, competitive shooting teams, instructor positions. The Marines don't just want good soldiers, Miss Martinez. We want the best soldiers. The crowd listened as outlined opportunities that transformed Sarah's demonstrated excellence into potential career paths. The Marines' recruitment demonstration had evolved into exactly what it was supposed to be, but through a route none of them had anticipated. "I'd need to think about it," Sarah said honestly. "My life is here in Texas with my family and my job." "Of course," agreed, "but I hope you'll consider it seriously. The Marine Corps needs people who can perform under pressure, who have dedicated themselves to excellence, and who understand that skill comes with responsibility. Based on what we've seen today, you embody all of those qualities." As the crowd began to disperse, individual approached Sarah to offer congratulations and ask questions about her shooting background. The Marines found themselves answering inquiries about recruitment with the enthusiasm they hadn't felt earlier in the day. Sarah's demonstration had accomplished something that traditional recruitment activities rarely achieved. It had shown potential recruits that the Marines valued and recognized excellence wherever they found it, even when it emerged from unexpected sources. Before leaving the fair, approached Sarah one final time. "Miss Martinez," he said, "regardless of whether you decide to pursue military service, I want you to know that you've taught my Marines something important today." "What's that, Sergeant?" "That assumptions are dangerous, and that the best warriors sometimes come from the places you least expect to find them." He handed her a business card. "If you ever want to explore what the Marines might offer someone with your talents, give me a call." As Sarah walked away from the Marine recruitment booth, the Beretta's weight still fresh in her memory, she carried with her something more valuable than the applause of the crowd or the Marines' grudging respect. She carried the knowledge that excellence, when combined with humility and dedication, could bridge any gap and earn recognition even from those who initially doubted it. The county fair continued around her, but Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed. The quiet mechanic who had arrived that morning had become something different by afternoon, not through boasting or self-promotion, but through the simple act of demonstrating what years of dedicated practice could achieve. Staff Sergeant watched her disappear into the crowd, already composing the report he would write about the day's events. It would be unlike any recruitment report he had ever filed, a story about the danger of assumptions and the unexpected places where excellence could be found. The Marines packed up their demonstration equipment as the fair wound down, but the lessons of the day would stay with them far longer than their visit to the small Texas town. They had learned that respect must be earned rather than assumed, that skill could emerge from the most unlikely sources, and that the best warriors were often those who let their actions speak louder than their words. For Sarah Martinez, the day marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where her quiet excellence had been recognized and validated by people who understood its true value. Whether or not she chose to pursue the opportunities it outlined, she would always carry the knowledge that when challenged, she had responded not with words or boasts, but with 5 perfect shots that spoke louder than any argument ever could.